Well, hello and welcome to today's Basic Hebrew session of the Bible study Hickory on this 23rd day of October 2022. When we met last week, we were taking a look at the inseparable prepositions. That is, those prepositions that are attached directly to the noun and thus do not form their own separate word, but actually are part of the word where the noun is. And these three inseparable prepositions are all pointed with the simple vocal schwa. So we have the lamed preposition, which indicates direction or reception. And so we would translate it as to or for. Then we also have the beth preposition indicating location, and so basic translation is in. It can also, in certain contexts, be translated with or by, but most usually primarily as in. And then we have the calf preposition, which indicates comparison or manner, as or like. And so again, these three prepositions pointed with a simple vocal schwa attached to a noun, like so. So here we have the word melech, which is king. And if we wanted to say to a king, then I would take the lamed preposition and attach it to the front of melech, giving us lemelech, to a king. But then if I wanted to indicate some sort of a location, beth preposition, b'melech, or manner, then I would go ahead and put the calf preposition onto the word. So kumelech, as a king. Now, same thing as well if we have the word Adam, which is that idea of human, humankind. So if I wanted to say to a human, then I would take the lamed preposition and attach that to the front of the word, giving us l'adam. Then as well, if I wanted to say in a man, then I would take the beth preposition, attach it to the front, ba'adam. And then as well, if I wanted to say as a man, then I would attach the calf preposition to it. So ku'adam. Now, normally you can see these particular inseparable prepositions are pointed with that simple vocal schwa, but we have a slight change that occurs when these prepositions attach to a word that begins with a simple vocal schwa, because two vocal schwas cannot stand side by side. And so what happens is the first vocal schwa will change to the nearest short vowel in pronunciation, which for a simple vocal schwa is a hickory. So thus, for instance, if we take the word Shemuel, and you can see it has a simple vocal schwa underneath the sheen there. So Shemuel, Samuel. But then if I wanted to say to Samuel, I would put the lamed preposition on the front of it, but where we would have had that simple vocal schwa underneath the lamed, that schwa has changed to a hickory under the influence of the second schwa. So thus I have le Shemuel here. Same thing as well, if I put the beth preposition, I still would have had two vocal schwas side by side. The first one changes to the hickory, the nearest short vowel in pronunciation. So thus we have be Shemuel, in Samuel. And then as well, if I wanted to say as Samuel, then I put the calf preposition on the front of it. I would have had two vocal schwas standing side by side. And so as a result, then the first one changes to the nearest short vowel in pronunciation, which would be the hickory. So ki Shemuel. And then you can see the same thing as well here with kings. So Milakim, two kings, le Milakim, in kings, be Milakim, as kings, ke Milakim. And that brings us now to where we were when we stopped last week, we were taking a look here at number 3, a special case of two. That is this idea of the simple vocal schwa underneath the preposition changing to that hierarch. So a special case of this occurs when the inseparable prepositions, so when that beth, lameth, or kaf are attached to a word that begins with a yod pointed with a simple vocal schwa. Taking, for example, here the word Yehuda. So in this instance as well, and I can come on over to this particular page where I have actually demonstrated this. So thus, let me make that a little bit bigger. So here we have then Yehuda, that is Judah. But now I'm not wanting to say Judah, I'm wanting to say to Judah. So as a result, I put the lameth preposition on the front of it. And you can see, as a result, I've got two vocal schwas standing side by side. This is an impossibility in Hebrew because of the fact that vocal schwas open syllables and they cannot form their own syllables in Hebrew. So thus we cannot have two vocal schwas standing side by side. So as a result, then, the first vocal schwa is going to change to the nearest short vowel in pronunciation, which would be the hierarch in this instance. And so thus that gives us this particular form. The lameth pointed with the hierarch, followed by the yod pointed with the simple vocal schwa. So thus we have le Yehuda. But now there's one more step in this process. The yod here, because of the fact that it can also form a long I, that is that hierarch yod with the hierarch, it will lose its consonantal character and joins together with the hierarch in order to form the hierarch yod. And so thus that gives us the form li huda here. So you can see then the explanation of this side by next to the notes. So the two vocal schwas cannot stand side by side. The first changes to the nearest short vowel in pronunciation. And then the yod loses its consonantal character and joins with the preceding vowel. And so that then is what we have here. And you will see that also the term quiesce as a somewhat equivalent to that idea of losing the consonantal character. And so thus, for example, Yehuda to Lihuda, Bihuda, and then Kihuda as well there. So Lihuda to Judah, Bihuda in Judah, and then Kihuda as Judah. But the same thing happens as well with other words. Jerusalem, for instance, so you can see Yerushalayim. Interesting that that particular word is dual in this instance. But I want to say to Jerusalem. So I put the lameth preposition on the front of it. The first schwa lengthens to a hierarch, the nearest short vowel in pronunciation, to a simple vocal schwa. And then the yod loses its consonantal character and joins together with the hierarch to form the hierarch yod. And so thus we get Lirushalayim. And then as well, and so that would be to Jerusalem. Birushalayim, same process in Jerusalem. And then Kirushalayim as Jerusalem. Then notice as well here, so they're talking about another case here similar to what we had up above where we had those two vocal schwas side by side. In this instance, however, we're not going to have a simple vocal schwa next to another simple vocal schwa. We're going to have a simple vocal schwa next to a composite schwa. And remember, those composite schwas are vocal schwas that can occur underneath a guttural because gutturals cannot take the simple vocal schwa. And we have four letters that are gutturals, and those are the aleph, the hey, the cheth, and the ayin. So notice here, another special case of what we've been discussing is when the inseparable preposition is prefixed to a word whose first letter is a guttural, aleph, hey, cheth, ayin, and that first letter has a composite schwa. For instance, taking the word ari here, a lion. So thus we have then this combination here, l, ari, but again, notice that we have those two vocal schwas side by side, the simple vocal schwa and the composite schwa, the hatef pathak. And so this cannot happen in Hebrew. So what is going to happen is the first vocal schwa is going to lengthen to the nearest short vowel in pronunciation. In the case of a hatef pathak, that means then that the first schwa is going to change to a pathak. And thus you can see what has happened here. So ari, a lion, and then la'ari, to a lion, or ba'ari in a lion, ka'ari in a lion. And okay, and then as well we have then edom, and then so Edom, to Edom, le'edom, in Edom, be'edom, and then as Edom, ke'edom. And I actually have another here. So notice what has happened. So I've got this little chart here that kind of goes through all of this as well. So vocal schwa resolution. Two vocal schwas cannot stand side by side. And then as well, if this situation occurs, the first vocal schwa will change to the short vowel nearest in pronunciation to that of the second schwa. And then, so you have that example here. So, le devarim, so two vocal schwas standing side by side. So the first one changes to the nearest short vowel in pronunciation for that simple vocal schwa, that it will be the Hickory. But then let's say we have le'edom. Well, in this instance, that first simple vocal schwa is going to change to the short vowel nearest in pronunciation to the composite schwa. In this case, for a hatef segol, that would be a segol. And so thus we have the form le'edom there. Now we can come on a little bit further here. Number 5, an exception to 4 is the word Elohim, God. And because of the fact that we are dealing with the word God, there are special things that happen with this particular word. So thus the combination is first le Elohim. So you can see that we do have where the schwa underneath the lameth changed to the segol underneath the influence of the hatef segol. But in this particular instance, the aleph being weak, it quiesces just like the yod did up above and loses its consonantal character. And as a result, then the segol underneath the inseparable preposition lengthens to the long E class vowel, to the seire. So thus Elohim, God, Lelohim, to God, Belohim, in God, and Kelohim, as God. And then we also have here number 6, talking about the name of our Lord, Yahweh. We have discussed that. In the text, it will usually be written with the pointing of the word Adonai, like what we have here. And so thus they have this where you have Yehovah, they would say. But given that that is actually a form that is rather challenging to pronounce in Hebrew, if not impossible. So thus what they do then is there's this slightly different pronunciation. So thus you have then the name Yihya, and then, but it is read Adonai, and then two, Yihya, and so thus, but so you would put that Lamed preposition on the front of it, and but it would be read as Ladonai. In Yihya, Badonai, as Yihya, Kadonai. Now, normally you will hear both the dean and me just read the name as Yihya, but the Jews will very often read Adonai instead, or nowadays even just say Hashem. So Hashem, the name. So now notice as well here, number 7. Sometimes immediately before the tone syllable, that is the accented syllable, the inseparable preposition, so those lamed, bet, and kaf that we've been dealing with, assumes the vowel kamates. So for instance, taking this form then, mayim, la mayim. So we have mayim, waters, and then la mayim, two waters. And in this particular instance, you can see that we do in fact have the saluk, that is that accent that indicates the accented syllable of the last word of the verse. It is there on the mem. And so as a result, then what happens is the inseparable preposition will adopt that comates in order to kind of ease into the accented syllable there. And then same thing as well here with the infinitive to sit, la sheveth. And again, under the influence of that accented syllable, we do have the pointing of the inseparable preposition with the comates. Now, B, and this is where I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. So when the inseparable preposition attaches to a word which has the article, for example, to the king, we would expect the form to be le hamelech. But the hey of the article drops out and the preposition assumes the pointing, thus becoming lamelech. And so thus coming on back to, not that document, to this one here. So for instance, if we take this particular word here, ha-adam, so the human, and notice what has happened in this particular instance. You have the hey article, hey with the pathak, followed by a dagesh forte. But the dagesh forte in this instance is inside of the guttural. So aleph, hey, cheth, ayin. But the problem with that is our gutturals cannot be doubled because of the fact that they are pronounced in the back of the throat. And so as a result, then the guttural rejects the dagesh forte. And in order to compensate for that, the preceding vowel underneath the article lengthens. We talked about that last week. So thus the weak guttural, the aleph, rejects the dagesh forte, and the preceding vowel lengthens. Now, so thus we have the human. But now I'm not wanting to say the human, I'm wanting to say to the human. So thus I would go ahead and put the lamed preposition on the front of it. So now we have le ha'adam. But the hey of the article, that hey is a rather weak sound. And so as a result, that hey is going to drop out, leaving us this form here. But as you can see, we have the vowel of the article. Well, it's standing alone. That cannot occur in Hebrew. So what happens? The preposition assumes the pointing of the article, leaving us with the form la adam. And so again, the preposition assumes the pointing. The same thing happens as well when we come to these strong gutturals. Remember the difference between the weak and the strong gutturals when we have the article attached to them is that when the weak guttural, that is the aleph and the hey, reject the dagesh forte, the preceding vowel lengthens. But In the case of the harsh gutturals, that is the cheth and the ayin, then we do not have a lengthening of the preceding vowel, but instead we have what we call virtual doubling. That is, it is as though doubling has occurred, but it really has not. So thus, hey with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte, which would be the normal pointing of the article on the word hoshek, darkness here. But hoshek, darkness, begins with that cheth, that strong guttural. And being a guttural, it cannot take the dagesh forte. And so it rejects the dagesh forte, but because of the fact that the cheth is that strong guttural, we do not lengthen the preceding vowel. Virtual doubling occurs. So thus we have then the darkness. But now I'm not wanting to say the darkness, I'm wanting to say to the darkness. So thus I will add the lamith preposition to the front of it. So now I have le hachoshek. Well, again, the sound that the hey of the article makes is still weak, even in this instance. And so thus the hey drops out, leaving us with this form here. And again, we have a vowel without a consonant, which is an impossibility in Hebrew. So what happens then is the lamith preposition or the inseparable preposition, either of the three, will go ahead and assume the pointing of the article, leaving us then with the form la choshek there. And so thus to the darkness, where the preposition has assumed that pointing. Now, the same thing as well happens when we are dealing with an article that is prefixed to an accented syllable having that comates there, especially with the guttural. So, for instance, here we have then ha afar, where again, hey with the pathak followed by the dagesh forte. But again, the dagesh forte is inside of the ayin, and the ayin is one of our gutturals, aleph, hey, cheth, ayin. Those letters cannot be doubled, thus they cannot take the dagesh forte. And so thus, as a result, the guttural is going to reject the dagesh forte. So now that would leave us with that particular form here with just the hey with the pathak followed by afar, dust. But because of the fact that the ayin is pointed with that comates, and this is in fact an unaccented syllable, as a result, then the article is going to change pointing to a segel. So the guttural rejects the dagesh forte, and the article is pointed with the segel under the influence of the unaccented ayin comates. So thus we have the dust. But now I'm wanting to say to the dust. So thus I would put the lamith preposition on the front of it. But again, the hey, being a weak sound, is going to drop out, leaving us with the vowel alone, which is an impossibility in Hebrew. And so the lamith preposition is going to assume the pointing of the article, leaving us with the form le afar. And so that then is what you will see when you have a preposition followed by the article, followed by the noun. The hey of the article is going to drop out, and the preposition will assume the pointing of that particular article. So if you see what appears to be a preposition, but it's not pointed with a vocal schwa, but it is pointed with something that appears to be the pointing of an article, that is what has happened. And as a matter of fact, I can take you over to Genesis 1 through 5, and demonstrate an example of this, especially right here in verse 5. So here we have then, Vayikra Elohim laor yom. Walachoshek kara laila. So here we have in this instance, Wayikra. We were talking a little bit earlier about the imperfect verbs. This is one of those imperfect verbs. So that is one of those imperfect verbs. And it has the yod on the front of it, indicating that it is third masculine. No U class vowel at the end, so this is third masculine singular. So this then, it would be cow, imperfect, third masculine singular, but it has the wow with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte, which is the wow consecutive, which would flip the aspect. And more about that a little bit later on the verb kara. So thus we would say then, and the subject follows the verb in Hebrew. So there's our subject, Elohim. So then God called Laor. So notice what we have in this instance. We can very clearly see the word or here, which is light in Hebrew. You can also see the lameth preposition on the front of it. But notice too the way that the lameth preposition is pointed. It is pointed with a kamates in this instance. So what has happened? We have the word or, hey with a pathak followed by a dagesh forte for the article, but the dagesh forte goes inside of the aleph, which is a guttural. So it rejects the dagesh forte, the preceding vowel lengthens, and then if I add the lameth preposition, the hey drops out, and the lameth assumes the pointing, giving us the form laor. So this then, we have the preposition on the, and the article on the noun or. So then God called to the light, and what did he call? He called Yom, that is day. And then we have with, so wilachoshek. And you can see there's our conjunction. So here's our conjunction. And then you also have the lameth preposition right there. And then notice too, we have the article on the word choshek. So again, in this instance,
looks a little small for me. Of course, I'm sitting back 3 feet from the screen.
all right. Let me try this.
I think sometimes it's hard to get it to the size within the limits of our screens. I know it is for me.
I think as well, there's something about the way that the resolution of the studio is interacting with both Teams and Google Meet. Because for me, what I just wrote, that was pretty big, about the same size as the Hebrew text that I have here.
Yeah.
So I think too, there's something, because even my mouse, I know that you've mentioned that my mouse has seemed very small, but it's about the size of the 18 point. So I think there's something going on with the resolution and the way it's interacting.
Maybe Microsoft needs to do their job.
All right. So we have then, whoops. Okay.
Oh, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely, please do.
Did you do lachoshek? You did that?
Working on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to know why it has a preposition on the front of it.
Ah, yes.
So anyway, but that's okay.
All right. So we have then choshek, darkness here. And then let's say I wanted to say the darkness. So ha choshek. And I'm sorry, I can't put the Dogish Forte in the middle of the faith with the BibleWorks keyboard. So we'll draw that in. So ha-hoshek. But again, because of the fact that we have that faith there, that guttural, the guttural is going to reject the Dogish Forte. But this is one of the harsh gutturals, and so the preceding vowel will not lengthen. So we have virtual doubling in this instance. So we have then ha-hoshek, and then lamed preposition pointed with the simple vocal schwa. And so as a result, then the hey is going to drop out with it being weak, and then the lamed is going to assume the pointing. And so that leaves us then with la-hoshek, and then we put the conjunction on the front of it. So thus we have and to the darkness, kara, which is another verb, and this here is going to be that cal perfect third masculine singular. So cal perfect third masculine singular of the verb kara. So he called, and what did he call? He called Lila, that is night. And so thus, that is what we have in this instance. Now, there is this particular question that the dean brought up here. Why is it that the Hebrew text reads, God called to the light day, and he called to the darkness night, when, if we come back up here to the English text, we read, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. In other words, where in English we treat both of those as objects instead of a prep phrase. Yes, sir. And so what has happened there is with this, that lamed preposition is very clearly indicating the direction of the calling with that lamed preposition. So in English, that direction does not necessarily come out very clearly, but the Hebrew does in fact make it very clear, and makes it clear what it is that the Lord called and what it was that was called that particular name.
So does that not, I mean, how do you call to something that doesn't have some kind of existence that would allow you to call to it? So that tells me there was a relationship existence between the creator and the thing he created. And even to call Yom, or call the light Yom and the darkness Lila, then those things had an existence in the creator, which, shall we say, enabled them to receive the communication from the creator as he called names to them. And that tells me something about the relationship between the creator and the created. And we don't see that in English. That's one of the weaknesses of our theology in the present day. So good thought.
Right. Very good. Well, see, what do you think? Go ahead, stop there, and I'll hand it over to you.
If you're at a point where you're finished with a section, sure, we'll do that.
All right, let's go ahead and do that then. So I'll go ahead and I'll stop the recording and then hand it over to you, sir.
And then we'll start again